The governor, perhaps the governor most associated with and dedicated to the topic of climate change during his time in office was Jay Inslee of Washington State. Now, Governor Inslee is former Governor Inslee, but he's no less dedicated to the issue, the policy, and also, and we'll talk about this, the politics of talking about climate change and how that can not only win elections for Democrats, but also maybe save the world. Hello, Governor Inslee. Welcome to The Gist. I should say welcome back to The Gist. I think I know I met you at the Iowa State Fair one year where you were running for president.
I'm sure we had some slathered in butter corn dogs of some sort.
Yes. And then the only environmental policy one dare be allowed to voice was favoring ethanol. But now that you've stepped away from national politics, do you think you're more free to talk more fully about a full range of economic and I should say environmental policies than you were when you were trying to, appeal to a narrow slice of the electorate in Iowa or New Hampshire?
Well, actually, this will shock you, but really not so, because I was pretty unfettered, unshackled, and free to shoot for what I really believed when I was running in Iowa. And I'm glad I did, because it inspired other Democrats that raised their ambitions on clean energy. And if you ask Joe Biden, he'll say that the Inflation Reduction Act was inspired in part by my candidacy and kind of forcing everybody to raise their game. So I was pretty free to spout off then and haven't really increased my spouting. It's always been pretty loud on this because I've always believed that this is really a great economic development strategy for the country and good for Democrats. So,
and that's the best way to pitch
to my
it,
story.
Right? And that's the best way to pitch it as economic development, right?
Well, I think it's always a mix. It's always a mix. I think this is one of the things that's bedeviled our discussion about how to talk about climate change is for people to say there's only one winning message. I don't think there is one winning message. It depends on the context. It depends who you're talking to. But certainly the economics of this is not mentioned as frequently as it should be when it comes to the climate crisis that we're experiencing. Because right now the Republicans are threatening to cut hundreds of thousands of jobs in this budget deal that are going to move forward otherwise under the existing Inflation Reduction Act and tax cuts. Those are real jobs. I can point to them in the state of Washington. There are real people being fired today because of Trump's lunacy and his phobia about wind turbines. So that economic message is profound and realistic. And then there's the health message, which is equally powerful, which really we need to stress, I think, more frequently when we talk about the climate crisis, because we have first order impacts, including the epidemic of asthma. But at the same time, you can't ignore the disasters that people are experiencing. I know any number of people whose homes have been burned down in forest fires. I had 2 whole towns burned down in Washington. Talked to my buddy in Florida the other day whose house has been flooded twice on the coast of Florida. So all 3 of those are tenable messages. You just got to figure out who you're talking to, what the context and the moment is, and they all deserve a place in this discussion.
Now, national polling shows that as an issue, voters put climate 14th. It is true that certain groups, and you talk about the young, rank it higher. But do you have a reason to believe, even if voters agree with you more than they disagree with you, the importance or salience of the issue is far below other things like economics, which I know you're going to say it does tie into economics, but it's below immigration. It's below 13 other issues.
Yeah, it depends how you ask the question. Because if you ask it just with the climate, label on it, you may get those results. But if you ask them a question, would you like to have a job? Would you like to have lower utility bills because wind and solar is cheaper than coal-based electricity right now? They'll say it's one of your highest priorities. So when you're talking about the economics of climate change, you don't even, in some sense, need to mention climate change. We're talking about an economic issue. Do you want cheaper electricity? high priority of people say yes. Well, the cheapest electricity you can get today is solar and wind. And Donald Trump and his lackeys in the Republican cult are now trying to deprive people of access to that cheapest electricity. If you want to talk about your kids' job and career prospects or your own, right now the jobs are being killed by this anti climate change, climate denying cult that's run in Washington, D.C. So if you approach it from those avenues, you actually are talking to people about where they live, even in their short term interests. But there's another issue here that I think people who have not run for office sometimes don't recognize. I've been in this game for 30 years. And what I've learned is if you're in an electoral battle, the most effective thing you can talk about is the biggest difference between you and your opponent, the clearest one, the one that is absolutely nobody can fudge.
Right.
People,
So,
when you're
because if you say I'm for
climate,
jobs, your opponent's going to say I'm for jobs because who's not for jobs? So what you have to do is light upon a real difference and say, and even have your opponent say, no, that guy's wrong. And then you can highlight the differences. You can contrast. So go ahead, take it from there.
That's exactly right. And the biggest, sharpest, most obvious and inarguable contrast between where I stand in my party and the other party is whether or not we should do something about the planet burning up. Now, I understand the Earth is a small planet, but there are those who love her. And frankly, it's most of our constituents. And this is something they can't fudge. They are denying the necessity of doing anything about this that's hitting us right in the face. So when you get these clear-cut differences, even if it might not list as the top 5 at the moment, you can make electoral progress in this regard. Now, I want to say this too, because you mentioned one of these issues about young people and where they stand on this issue. It is clear that we need to do more communication around this subject. We do not provide people enough information with sufficient frequency to get them to think about it. They receive 20 car commercials a week and they hear about the climate crisis, once every 8 months. My side of the agenda has to get on podcasts, your place where social media lives, rather than just the New York Times and frankly an NPR, both of which I love. And this is a
but you got
strategic
them. You got
basis.
those
I'm
voters.
actually working on that.
Yeah, I was going to say, you got those. Those are in your column. And that's what I want to ask you about. In order to win elections, you have to not just extra convince the people who are going to vote for you anyway. You have to convince marginal voters, maybe marginal non-voters. And Matt Yglesias was writing in his blog, he saw that you had written an op-ed in the Washington Post. Democrats can win over young Trump voters. Here's how. The party should focus on the issue that represents the greatest threat to Gen Z climate change. That was the Washington Post headline and subhead of your piece. And what Matt points out, and I think it's a fair argument, and I'd love to give you a chance to respond. He says that marginal voters do not care about this as much as you say they do, marginal non-white and marginal young voters. And he says, we just spent 2021 through 24 running the experiment of what happens when the Democratic Party makes climate rather than healthcare or other aspects of the social safety net their top legislative priority. And what happened was an unprecedented swing of young people and voters of color toward the GOP. I don't want to argue that this happened solely because of climate focus, but to turn around and to say that even more climate focus is the answer strains credulity. And then he goes on to say that young voters and non-white voters are even more focused on economic well-being than older voters and whiter voters. So why do you think, not only does it not strain credulity, why do you say that this is the way forward?
Well, I don't have to sprain or even strain anybody's credulity. The fact of the matter is I won 3 terms as governor running on this issue. So that criticism is welcome as an intellectual exercise. But the fact is I've won 3 governor's races going away in part because I had a way of talking about this. Now that criticism is valid to some degree, because he was sort of attacking a straw man. I didn't say this is the only message that's going to win every election all the time, or even in that particular case. But I do believe that we can exercise more power, electoral power, if in fact we talk about their climate denial, their decision to take away these jobs, their decision to give people more asthma. And I actually think the reverse is true. We did not, the president, Vice President Harris did not run on climate change. We did not test that capacity. She never mentioned the word during her election, virtually. So we did not test that. It remains to be tested. And he and I are both right. This criticism is right, that we do need more communication on this subject so people do raise it as a priority, number one. And number two, we have to learn how to talk about it. And the very first comments that I talked to you about it is the way to talk about it is through an economic lens, is through a health lens, is through a lens talking to people where they live, is through the lens of utility costs. Now, that has not been done adequately in many places. It has done in my state because I've spent 30 years figuring out how to talk about this, and this is why I've been successful electorally. So maybe both of us are right. We have more work to do in this regard.
Is Washington an outlier as opposed to the average or marginal voter in the rest of the country?
I don't think so. You know, obviously we're a little bluer than many states, but we kind of tested this in a clear up or down vote. So we passed the Climate Commitment Act that basically created a cap and invest system for the state of Washington. And the fossil fuel guys and their right-wing friends came in and tried to repeal it last November. They put it on the ballot. We had a knockdown drag debate about that, and we won 62-38. We had an up or down vote on climate change action in the state of Washington, and we won 62-38. And we won in the vast majority of counties, including in red districts. And the reason is we talked about the economic benefits of reducing carbon pollution, the economic benefits of getting people cheaper electricity bills and better electric transportation systems. And we won 62-38. This was an up or down vote. So if you look at the salience of this issue, it wasn't some, kind of poll with 400 people. It was 8 million people voting on it. And we proved that it can be defended in the state of Washington in red counties. I used to represent a red county when I was first in Congress. We won that in Yakima County. We won it in Southwest Washington. So I guess that was, if you looked at the national test of this theory, come to Washington State. We proved it works.
Okay. So that's about the lens. That's about what you emphasize and talk about. What about what you deliver? This is a Washington Post article from 2024, and the numbers haven't changed that much at all, really. Biden's $7.5 billion investment in EV charging has only produced 7 stations in 2 years. I think it's up to 8. They're not getting a big boost from the Trump administration. I know it takes time for money to get through the system, but this touches on the idea of the abundance agenda. Even if you have the right talking points or the right funding, if you're not delivering, how much credit are you getting as Democrats?
Well, we've got a lot of credit in my state because we have financed our EV installation through our Cap and Invest, our Climate Commitment Act, and we've doubled them. We have over 7,000 charging ports now in the state, publicly available charging ports. We've doubled that in the last 4 years. So on a state basis, we've made some really great progress using state funds. But the federal EV system has not succeeded. And the reason is that the way it was structured federally created so many roadblocks to installation on domestic content, on accessibility, on a whole host of measures that basically hamstrung the effort. And that has to be fixed. It is extremely disappointing that it has not been a successful program on a federal basis. But the EV transportation system has been a smashing success. In my state, 1 out of every 5 cars now that are sold are electric. It's 1 out of 4 across the world. We're getting cars that are very reasonably priced with 300 miles of range, and they're going gangbusters. So if you look at the ecosystem, it's gone quite well. But I would hope that we'd have to restructure that program rather than dismantling it. And the dismantling is not an overstatement. The Republican budget, that cult is producing a total obliteration of anything to help Americans both with this transition and with that job creation. They're going to effectively zero out these tax breaks that are creating so many jobs. In fact, there's a group called Climate Power that I'm doing some work with. They've done a evaluation of the job loss. They've already identified 62,000 jobs that have been lost or threatened in the short term, and about 500,000 in the out years by the repeal of these tax breaks that are so important. And we've had about 12 Republicans, only 12, who've even raised a note of concern about this. But unfortunately, they're probably going to fold. And we're going to find a lot of job loss and reduction of the economic potential dominance of America in this field. And here's one of the things so frustrating to me. Trump talks about how he wants American dominance of energy, but he's basically shooting ourselves in the foot with the largest, most expansive part of our energy portfolio is in clean energy. It's wind turbines, it's solar power, where it's cheaper in 90% of America right now to produce electrons with solar and wind. And he's destroying that, what could be a dominant source of our energy. That's extremely frustrating. So yeah, I wish we had some more Republicans who decide they want to opt out of this cult.
Yeah, Republicans should like wind. Oklahomans should like wind. And at the risk of giving you a Mark Russell type punchline for a guy who generates so much wind, he certainly is weirdly against it. But I want to go back.
I've tried to figure out where this comes from. And, maybe he was scared by a windmill when he was a 5-year-old. He never got over the phobia. It's just, it's so. Well,
but he's in Queens. Like, where's he going to encounter a windmill? A miniature golf course? It's very odd.
Maybe he went to the Netherlands somewhere. He saw the old windmills.
But I do have to go back. I'll take your point that you in the state of Washington had a much more successful rollout of EV charging stations. But if it's such a disappointment on the federal level, Democrats don't have that many chances to pass a big bill, and they do, and they give it a lot of funding. And there are certainly a lot of headwinds. You've spent a lot of time talking about the headwinds supplied by the conservatives. If they don't actually deliver and prove to people that you shouldn't have range anxiety, that your EV is just as good as a gas-powered car. In fact, it's cheaper. If they don't actually change the perception because they've changed the reality, because they've delivered on their funding, is there real hope for this not only as a talking point, but as a successful policy?
Well, again, I hate to delve into facts and experience, but let me point out, we tested your question here. It's not a hypothetical. Basically, in this election we had last November, the friends of the fossil fuel industry who want us to continue to be addicted to oil and gas said this is never going to work. We're never going to have a transition to electricity and transition. This is just a hallucination of these, granola-eating liberals. People voted it down 2-1 because they recognize this is a viable technology. Yes, the federal system has not worked as well as it should, but it's working where you want to build them in state by state. And by the way, we got to focus more on states, not just Congress. We have 24 states now in the U.S. Climate Alliance. We represent 60% of the country, and all of them are moving forward. So I guess all is not lost. That has been one glitch in this transition, but it's moving forward, and we're not going backwards. This transition to electricity is going to move forward. It's just a question of how fast. But I wish I could say that we could avoid a 3-year halt, which we're getting under Donald Trump.
Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez was once your constituent. Now she represents the 3rd District of Washington. She talks about this issue, and she's far from a climate denier. She runs an auto body shop, and she doesn't want 116-degree days because then no one comes into the auto body shop, and she's apparently repaired a washing machine so that it works for 70 years. But she, too, talks about the paucity of charging stations in rural areas. She wants them. She clamors for them. So a lot of the statistics about all the charging stations that are out there, it's it's very hard for rural areas and rural people who are separated by great distances to be as assured that they're going to get their chargers as those in urban areas. That's a reality, right? I mean, it is harder for the rural areas, and it is more of a leap for a rural driver to say, I am going to solely rely on an EV than someone who does their driving over short distances in an urban or suburban environment.
Yeah, I think you're referring to an interview she gave a couple years ago. We've got twice as many chargers in that area as we did a couple years ago. This is a rapidly changing situation. And what we're finding, look, I drive all over the state of Washington. I've got an old Chevy Bolt. You know, it's got 250 range. They're now up to about 315 miles. I travel all over the state of Washington. I've got access. It's real easy to get access. We got a universal plug that you can plug into multiple systems, including Tesla. I was in Grays Harbor the other day, and there's 6, chargers right there, right next to the highway. This is a rapidly changing phenomena that you're referring to, and I've always thought that in a transition, no transition is perfect on day one. We're in the midst of a transition. And she rightfully points it out, we need to continue building this charging infrastructure. There is no question about that. But you don't build charging infrastructure by eliminating the financing to be able to do it. So what I can report to Washington State is when you do have financing, you will find a significant success. People will vote for it as they have, including increasing our state legislature who ran on these issues in the last November cycle. And so I'm here to give you a little boost of confidence in our ability to tame this beast. And by the way, I think that's really important. We can't just be doom and gloom. We have every day there's a climate disaster in the United States practically. I know people lost their homes in the fires in Los Angeles. I told you my buddy has had to raise his house twice in Florida now. We've got Tornado Alley chewing up the Midwest. But we can't just get down to the dumps. We got to have confidence that we can defeat climate change. And I think that's a really important part of this transition. And the good news is there's a reason for that confidence. The cost of solar has come down like 40% in the last 10 years. The cost of wind continues to come down. The progress in advanced batteries is insane. We have the first fusion energy system we hope to be in construction next year in the state of Washington. We're just awash in good news stories about this, but we can't sort of give up because at a moment, one part of this, which you correctly point at, the federal EV system, has not been up to snuff. That's why it needs to be reformed, but it should not be eliminated.
Congress recently passed a law that it undid an exception for the state of California to essentially allow California to pass rules that aspired to be 100% EV by 2050. But by next year, they were to be 35% EV. They're right now at 25% EV, and the curve was pretty steep, except the last couple years. It is very much leveled out. And what the consumers of California are saying and what the experts say is that early adoption of the people who are really interested in the technology and could afford the technology, that has happened. And now you've reached a point where it's very expensive for a certain amount of people and they have range anxiety and other reasons why they might not be able to buy a car. So the politics of it were all the Republicans voted to scotch this California requirement, but so did 50 or so frontline Democrats in exactly the kind of districts that you have to win if you want to win national elections or state elections. And so I know how you would vote on it, but my question to you is, were those Democrats wrong on the politics? Are they misreading the politics, which drove them to vote against that exception for what was to be California's mandates?
Well, I guess what I would point out is I've heard a lot of folks talk about the importance of states' rights. Certainly Republicans have talked about states' rights when it came to in so many different ways. I go back to George Wallace talking about states' rights. But the first time that a state wants to actually use this technology, like California and Washington, all of a sudden states' rights means nothing. I would suggest that no matter what you think about this issue, I would disagree with those who voted that way because they dishonored what the states wanted to do with their own decision making. And California and Washington want to move forward with this because we believe we can achieve these.
Oh,
there
yeah,
might be some flexibility.
Right. Washington signed on to those exact standards.
Right. And so
yes,
we're signed on. There's, I believe, 12 other states as well. I think in our United States, and states are important in this, to allow states to be more visionary than Mississippi and Alabama and Texas. We want to be more visionary than Alabama and Mississippi. And I don't think that's a bad thing. We're more ambitious than they are. We believe in technology more than they do. We don't have as many climate deniers as they do. We have a better EV charging installation program than they do. So let's let all flowers bloom and allow states to move forward on this. And as far as the timelines on this, this is one part of the difficult situation. We're not setting the timeline on this. Mother Nature is. Look, we're in a race, and Mother Nature doesn't cut us a lot of slack here. And the fact is that we're heading to absolute catastrophic disaster if we do not act with alacrity here. There was a report yesterday that says we may already be in a case of the collapse of the Antarctic and Greenland ice sheets, which means several feet of sea level rise, which would be catastrophic to millions of people. We have desertification going on. I've had 2 whole towns burned down. This is a race, and in a race, sometimes you got to be a little more ambitious than totally in your comfort zone. So let us be free of the shackles of Mississippi. I don't think that's too much to ask.
It's a Hubert H. Humphrey reference, right? From the.
No, I actually didn't know that. You're a better political historian than I am, actually.
I think, okay, I might be missing which year of the DNC, but Hubert H. Humphrey gave this speech in an Atlantic City Democratic National Convention where he said, "Let us emerge from the shadow of states' rights into the bold, bright future of human rights."
Well, he was much more eloquent than I was.
Yeah. You could, give a stem winder back then. Last question. Do you regret the fact that Teslas as a brand have become, to many consumers or potential consumers, sullied?
Well, yeah, it's one of those unfortunate historical events. I got a ride. I ran into a guy the other day who really got me interested in battery technology, 15, 18 years ago now, who talked about what we were going to do on batteries, which is now coming to pass. And by the way, let me just say this. We've been right on a lot of things. I wrote a book in 2007 that says electric vehicles were going to be totally accessible, have long range, and be cheap by this time. And by gum, we were right. Mm-hmm. Those who have been optimistic about technological innovation have been right now for about 2 decades. And that should give us a really sense of optimism. So yes, to have that sort of unfortunate connotation of having, Elon Musk associated with a good product is unfortunate. I don't think it's in the scope of history going to slow down this revolution though, because we now have so many different models that are effective. And if you don't like Tesla, you can buy a Chevy Equinox here and pay about, like $30,000 and get a car that goes 315 miles. And by the way, is a lot faster off the line than these gas-powered slugs. I go to a gas-powered car and I just boom right by it, right? And they just kind of cry as the electric car scoots by. So I don't think it's going to be a long-term problem. I do regret what Elon Musk is doing to us. Let me give you an example on that. Last night I was at the Climate Solutions dinner and a young woman came up to me who is at the University of Washington. She is a biochemist. And what Musk is doing is crippling our scientific assessment of what's going on in the United States, crippling our cancer research, crippling the national assessment to even be able to report to people about this problem, diminishing our ability to get weather reports. The fact that the nation that sent a man to the moon now has a cult that is degrading our scientific research budgets is incredibly shooting ourselves in the foot. This is the genius fundamentally of America, is in our research facilities at these universities. And when I meet these brilliant young scientists who are now going to be laid off, who've done years of research in advanced batteries and solar power, in cancer research. The fact that a guy who's brilliant has been responsible for that is just a tragedy. And I don't know how it happened. I don't know why it happened, but it's a damn crying shame.
All right. I did say last question, but one just hit me. Are you among those who will tell me that paper straws stand up to the rigor of most beverages?
I'm in favor of all straws. I'm of the all of the above position of straws. How's that? So they seem to work, but I don't drink my cold beer from straws, so I don't pay that much attention to the issue. You'll have to advise me about that.
What about iced coffee or milkshakes?
I'm just a plain black guy, and I love a milkshake. I'll drive 50 miles for a good milkshake, and
spewing no carbon emitting gases along the way. Yes.
No, but go to Newport, Washington, and have the Huckleberry milkshakes there, and you'll never leave Newport, Washington. I'll tell you that.
Jay Inslee was the governor of the state of Washington from 2013 to 2025. Thank you so much, Governor Inslee.
Thank you. I hope we can do it again. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I did too. Thanks very much.
Well, I'll see you in Seattle.
Okay, take care. If you want, I could put you on the list. Do you want to come?
Put me on the list. I'm not sure where I'll be that day. I might be out spouting off about climate change somewhere.
Okay.
Put me on the list.
We'll put you on the list and we'll contact you through however we contacted you the first time.
All right.
All right. Thanks so much.
Take
care.